Quantum computing, is it going to destroy cryptocurrencies? No, it won't. But also, yes, it will.
Huh?
Howdy, folks. I'm Sam I Am. Welcome to the show. Well, this is a question that I get quite often. Is quantum computers, is the whole quantum technology, is that going to be a threat to cryptocurrencies? As most of you probably know, what secures your digital tokens, your crypto assets, whatever you want to call them, is encryption. And it is a public and private key, the way most encryption works. And quantum computers, by their very nature, are actually very efficient at cracking that sort of encryption. And there's news out from Google here just recently. We're going to dive into this. And they've reportedly attained quantum supremacy. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. I'm going to explain. Thanks to somebody in the Facebook group, Lambos, Hookers, and Blow. He pointed me to this video right here, which is an excellent video. I've watched it 4 times, and I'm just now beginning to comprehend what all is covered in here. I'm going to link it below in the description for those of you that like torturing yourself. You can go and watch this as well. But I'm going to pick a few highlights out of here and kind of walk through it and do my best to break it down for you guys in simple enough terms. We're going to start with this. This is really explaining the paradigm shift when you go from classical computing, what he calls classical computing, whatever device you're watching this on right now is a classical computer, versus quantum computing. And the analogy that he uses is a book with 100 pages. So I'm going to play a little bit here and let you guys listen.
And after you've read all 100 pages one by one, you'll know everything that's in the book. But if, on the other hand, it's a quantum book written in quantum information where the pages are highly entangled with one another, then when you look at a page, what you see is just random gibberish revealing very little information that distinguishes one highly entangled book from another. And even after you've read all the pages one by one, you know almost nothing about the content of the book. And that's because the information in the quantum book doesn't reside in the individual pages. It's encoded almost entirely in the correlations among the pages. Now, that's quantum entanglement, and it's very different.
Okay, so what he's just described there, if you go, typically, if you have a book and you read through the pages one at a time, you're going to add to the information that you understand. With quantum, it doesn't work that way. You have to basically look at the entire set of information. I almost think of it like an encyclopedia. You would have to see every page to be able to make sense of anything that's in the encyclopedia. If you looked at one book or one page in the book, well, you won't be able to do anything with that because the information is not all contained in that one book or that one page. It's the data set as a whole. And you can they have these things called qubits, which are, there's various ways, but a photon and the polarization, they can manipulate and rotate it and spin it. Same thing with an electron, and they can measure the magnetic field of the electron to determine which orientation these base particles currently have. And so as you add these qubits to the system, it gets inherently more complex. Think of it as adding another book to the encyclopedia set. And it grows so fast, or so much so that here's an example. A complete description of a typical quantum state of just 300 qubits requires more bits than the number of atoms in the visible universe. So what that means is, a 300 qubit computer, not all that powerful. But the output, the volume of information that you would have to look at, like, all the pages of the encyclopedia, would be more bits than the number of atoms in the universe. That's a lot. That's not something that a classical computer is ever going to be able to process. So what that means is that you're going to have to not just have a quantum computer that can process and do tasks, but it's going to have to be able to analyze and make sense of the information and present it back to the user. There's an interface problem here that he kind of describes in this presentation. And this just kind of gives you an idea of the scale. So let me go ahead a little bit here. Let me see what he's... Yeah. Okay, here's another example. So there's this idea of the theory of everything, meaning could we model the universe, theory of everything? And they've said, these two scientists have said, yeah, absolutely we can. However, it cannot be solved accurately when the number of particles exceeds about 10. And that's because the volume of the information that you have to process increases exponentially. And by the time you get to 10, what they're saying is no computer existing or that will ever exist, they'll probably be wrong about that, can break this barrier because it is a catastrophe of dimension, meaning so much data, it's more than anything our classical computers, again, think the laptop, the phone, whatever you're watching this on is a classical computer. It's dealing linearly, with bits and processing them through. Whereas with quantum, it's more like flash, entire encyclopedia. Here, make sense of this, So again, they're pointing out this is has such a massive scale that it's tough to compare. Now, let me go back here. And part of the problem is, he describes it here, is they want these qubits to interact strongly with one another. They don't want them to interact with the environment. And in the case of like the IBM supercomputer, they actually encase the whole thing in glass to isolate it from vibration, from electrical interference, all kinds of different things. And if we look at the Google one right here, you can see these copper tubs in the background over here. Those actually slide up onto this round thing here to isolate it from the external environment. So on the one hand, they want them to interact with each other. They want to isolate them from the environment, except they want to be able to manipulate them from the external environment to, control them and input data. And they also want to be able to measure them to get output data. So it's kind of like a catch-22, a bit of a conundrum. And that's why he's saying this is so hard for us to figure out. Let me play.
That we've gotten as far as we have. So where are we? We're on the brink of what's been called quantum supremacy. That means a quantum computer which is capable of performing some tasks would surpass what the most powerful existing digital computers can do. Not necessarily tasks that we care about for other reasons, but nevertheless, some computations are too hard classically, and we'll be able to do them, we think, with near-term devices.
Okay, and this has happened. This was recorded 6/27 of this year. And of course, the Google News right here is that they have attained quantum supremacy. And so what that is, it's, as he said, it's a task that would be otherwise unsolvable by classical computers, but is actually very easy with quantum computers. And what they did is they built right down here, 72 qubit quantum computer, and they used it to solve a problem. Now, the problem that they solved is they took a random number that came out of a random number generator, and they used the quantum computer to verify that it was indeed a random number. So useful, okay, yeah, maybe to some folks, but not really super useful for, it's not like, they talk about in some of these articles, well, it's 72 qubits now. When they get to 2048, well, then they're going to be able to crack encryption. No, not in the least. Okay. And the reason is this doesn't have error correction. There's no error correction going on in here. And that is a huge, huge problem. What they did is they went out and found a use case that actually, that this computer could be used to solve, not so much solved a problem that was pre-existing out in the world that this computer would, could be developed to solve. If there was a 72-bit encryption key, would this computer be able to crack it? No. All it can do is really verify these random numbers. So, however, it points out here, the quantum computer's processor allowed a calculation to be performed in just over 3 minutes. This is verifying the random number. That calculation would have taken over 10,000 years on the largest commercial computer available. So quite a difference there. Obviously a quantum leap in technology. However, no error correction. It could do this task even though it doesn't have error corrections, just because it was kind of handpicked for this machine. Okay, hopefully you guys are following along here. So let me see what else I want to point out here. Oh, yeah. Let's keep going with this. Okay, so this is what he labels a NISQ, a NISQ era computer. I'm going to let him talk about it. This is John Preskill, by the way. He's highly regarded in the field. I think he's a Caltech professor. Again, it was a great speech, but I had to watch it 4 times, and I'm just beginning to comprehend it. So let's listen to what he says here, though.
The intermediate scale quantum. Intermediate scale means we're talking about devices of sufficient size, say more than 50 qubits, so that we can't by brute force simulate them with the most powerful digital computers we have. But noisy emphasizes that these systems won't be error corrected, the gates will be noisy, and those errors will put limits on the computational power of NISQ technology. Now for physicists, NISQ is exciting.
Okay, so what that means, and of course he's saying 50 to 100 qubit quantum computer. Google's is 72, so that's exactly what this is. But it doesn't have error correction built in, and because there are noise in the gates, in the switching and the measuring that they have to do with these analog devices, it's not useful for most of the tasks that are out there. The advantage, though, is that this computer is a real-world example that they can use to run and do simulations and tests and experiments with that go beyond what their supercomputers, the classical computers of today, can simulate. Right? So they've been running simulations up to this point, and now they're to the point where they've actually built a physical, real-world quantum computer that exceeds what they can simulate. Doesn't mean it's about to crack encryption, long ways from that, as we'll see here in a second. But it does mean that they're, I try to think of an analogy, and I kind of thought about fire. Today we are masters of fire, right? We use it to fly through the air, to drive around the planet, to traverse the oceans, to heat our homes, to, do all kinds of things, generate power, electricity that gives us all kinds of things and modern conveniences and so forth. But back in the Bronze Age, they had fire, but they couldn't do a lot with it because first they had to, figure out how to make a forced air furnace. And for that, you needed tools. Well, they used the tools that they had in the Bronze Age to build, bellows and things, and eventually fans that did the forced air and got the temperatures up to where they needed to melt steel. And then they could start fashioning tools, and it continues to grow from there. But the point is, you don't go from Bronze Age swords, blacksmith to watch repair overnight. There's a lot of intermediary steps in there, and you have to build the tools and progress one step after another and build upon the previous tools. And they're in the very early stages they're just now getting past what they can actually simulate on the classical computers. They're finally exceeding that and getting to a real world simulator. But again, no error correction, no way to really do anything all that useful with it other than figure out, okay, what's the next step? What's the next tool that we need to build? What's the next innovation that we need to come up with in order to keep advancing this forward? Okay, so that's what he's talking about. So he goes through a bunch of examples. He's talking here about how, you can have a quantum processor, but we've got this classical optimizer to read the data, manipulate the data going in and out, and that's a limitation, obviously because of the scale issues that we talked about. And they're actually looking to find limitations. Actually, let me go back. There's a slide right here. So right now they've got classically easy. So if I bring up the calculator, enter 248 times 3,657.25964321785, bam, this classical computer that I'm using right now can return an answer very, very fast. But if it comes to, I need to crack a password with, a decent level of encryption through brute force attack, well, that's going to take a lot longer, but that's much easier for a quantum computer. So they're kind of in this quantum easy stage. They're looking for things. And what Google came up with is, well, we can verify that a random number is random. And there are other things along those lines, and encryption is one of those. And then there are things outside of that that are actually quantumly hard that they will eventually evolve to. But, right now they're barely crossing this line, and they're barely getting beyond what they can simulate with classically easy computers. Okay, let's see. He goes on here. There's a whole lot of detail about progress and basically different approaches that they're trying to figure out so that they can innovate further in the space. Okay, here's where I want to jump to. Let me back up just a little bit. So right there, and I just want you guys to listen to this. So again, NISC is like the Google quantum computer that they've just announced. Oh, and
the number of gates we have to execute. How high that cost is depends on the quality of our hardware and on the problem we're trying to solve.
Okay, so he's pointed out the NISC era quantum devices, like the Google one, are not error corrected. And depending on the quality of the hardware, that's what determines how much error correction is needed. Okay, and listen to this.
But here's an example, a recent analysis of the resources we would need to break a public key crypto system as it's currently used today with a quantum computer which has a gate error rate comparable to the best that has so far been demonstrated in the lab of about 10 to the minus 3. And the answer is that we would need about 20 million physical qubits to run that algorithm.
20 million. Right now, this computer right here is at 72, okay? And they would need to get to 20 million with the best hardware that they've got today. Now, they could improve their error rates and get better hardware. That's certainly possible. There's all kinds of innovations that could speed this up, but that should give you some perspective on just how far off into the distance being able to crack public key encryption that cryptocurrencies rely on is actually out. I mean, it's got a long ways to go. They are in the very, very early stages. And I just showed this right here. This is Praxis. This is a token that runs on the Elixir network. And they put out an article talking about this and basically saying some of the same things I've told you. And I want you to read their conclusion down here. Is cryptocurrency doomed or cryptography doomed? While some commentators have been quick to welcome our new quantum computing overlords, the short-term implications of this breakthrough are modest. And that's almost an overstatement in my opinion. This task seems tailored to favor the strengths of quantum computers rather than doing work useful for cryptographic calculations. Again, that computer verified a random number. It didn't crack encryption because it can't. It doesn't have the error correction capabilities, and it's not like they can interface a classical computer to handle that error correction because the volume of data is so massive. Additional breakthroughs will be needed before quantum computing can be applied to decryption. This doesn't mean that the blockchain community should ignore these developments. Certainly not. In this next post, we'll describe, and they go on. So this, one of the reasons I like this, another one of the many reasons that I like this privacy token, is that it has some quantum resistance built into it, thanks to David Charum, I believe, who's a well-known, highly regarded cryptography guy, and he's already kind of built in some quantum computer resistance into this chain. And I'm sure there will be fixes for some of the other ones out there, but again, like nobody wants to put a date on this and say, it's going to be he talks about mainstream users need to be patient. Here, let me play the rest of this.
Because of the overhead needed for quantum error correction, even though the number of logical protected qubits is just a few thousand. So if we're going to reach that regime of scalability, we're going to have to cross a very daunting chasm from where the technology is likely to be in the next couple of years, with hundreds of qubits to millions of physical qubits, and that's probably going to take a while. So the people eager to use these platforms are probably going to have to be patient.
So nobody's going to come out and say, oh, it won't happen for another 5 years or 10 years, or nobody wants to put a date on it because it's very early stages, and there's no telling what kind of innovations could come about that could really rapidly advance the timetables. Is it going to happen this year? Absolutely not. Is it going to happen in 5 years? No, absolutely not. 10 years? Very, very unlikely. 20 years? Probably also pretty unlikely. 30 years? Maybe. Maybe it'll be there by then. But, it could even extend beyond that. And it's really, there is no for sure answer. The one wild card that I would throw in would be, the U.S. government. They have been working with interdimensional technology from downed alien aircraft since the 1950s. And, no telling what kind of innovations they've learned from back engineering that technology. What that community says is that the technology that they have is at least 30 years in advance of what's in the public sector today. But then you also have like the Turing problem where, during World War II, the Turing machine broke the Germans' encryption, and they knew all of their troop movements and everything that was going on, but they still had to send some of their troops and some of their assets into harm's way. The reason being, if they avoided all of them, it would let the Germans on to know that, they've cracked the encryption, and then they lose that capability. So I think the same thing, if they even have a quantum computer that's capable, further along than what we're seeing here, if they even have something like that, they are probably going to be hesitant to use it because they're using it now to crack all kinds of state secrets and who knows what else. And if they start using it, the more they use it, the more likely it is to become apparent to other people that, they have this, so this is not safe. And then countermeasures would be produced, and it would render the capability useless. So who knows, though? That's just speculation. But, I think cryptocurrency as it exists today, even Bitcoin and XRP and Litecoin and all the others, even the ones that are not quantum resistant, are going to be fine, and very likely for not years, but decades away. This is really in its infancy. It's got a long, long ways to go. What they're eventually going to have to do, because of the massive volume of data, is actually build a another component to the quantum computer that actually handles error correction at a quantum level. But again, that's where you get into with the current technology, 20 million gates and other qubits to handle the error correction, so that what it spits out is error corrected. And and then it has to scale up from there. So again, it's a long, long ways off. I don't think it's anything you guys should worry about. And there you go. I'm Sam I Am. If you like my work and you want to support it, you can go to patreon.com/tothelifeboats. We'll catch you next video.